And welcome into This Life Matters. You're in here with Drew and Gigi. I'm Drew, and this, of course, is
Gigi.
how you been doing? You feeling better?
Yeah, I had a little hip repair surgery over the holidays, and I've been in a wheelchair, walker, cane, and now I'm kind of moving okay.
So no more football is what you're basically saying. You've officially retired from the game of football. No more.
Apparently, I've retired from the game of golf for 4 months.
4 months. That's it.
4 months, that's it. Yeah.
That's not
And
that bad.
yoga. I don't know when yoga starts back up either. I'm in physical therapy, so I'm starting the year out with physical therapy.
All right, that's good. I'm glad you're
Yeah,
back in the saddle. That means if you're back in the saddle, we're back in the saddle. So we've
that's
got
right.
a good series coming your way. It's a really good one. It's called the Moral Conflicts of Life. It's a good one. But before I get into telling them a little bit about how we're going to start off the Moral Conflicts of Life series, what is the what's our saying? Did I put you on
Our
the spot?
lives begin to end the day we stop talking about things that matter. Yeah, you put me right on the spot.
I think the first time Martin Luther King said it, he might have said it that way. You never know.
He said our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter.
All right. And with
Yeah.
that, we would like to welcome you into the first in this series of the moral conflicts of life. Now, what happens is in life, we experience all of these different things where we might want to say something should be this way, and our morals may say straight down the line it needs to be this way. But then all of a sudden, life happens. And when real life happens, it presents you with different options, and you end up with conflicted feelings. And all of a sudden there's a gray area where you've been taught it's only black or white,
Mm-hmm.
and now you don't understand how to take care of this shade. So we're here to kind of try to help you navigate your way through the shade and figure out some of those emotions and feelings, because sometimes it's not necessarily those conflicts are a good thing. In fact, on This Life Matters, we love to say that conflict is actually a good thing,
Mm-hmm.
that you've got to
Yeah.
have healthy conflict, and we're here to kind of teach you and help you get through conflict. So today we're going to talk about politics. That's what we're going to start it off with, because I think, just to be truthful, that's the number one thing that we tend to be conflicted about when it comes to morals and values and the reality of our options. You know,
That's right. And now even more, there's more talk right now about what's going on in politics, politicians, how that affects our everyday lives, um, whether it does or not, um, and all the things, the ramifications that have come out of the last election season, and even looking toward the next election season. So there's people that don't care much about politics and don't follow politics, but I can tell you right now, I think more people are talking about this issue than almost anything.
I think one of the things that's really important for because I've been a part of that small group of people who said, okay, I'm going to put politics in the back pocket. But the truth of the matter is, if there's any social injustice in this world, you then, once you begin to care about it and your heart begins to bleed for it, you then have entered the realm of politics, because
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that politicians have done and have always done down through time, it's not a new thing. They've taken what's near and dear to your heart and they use it for a platform. So if there whatever form of social injustice that you see, whether it's children being abused and they're not being harsh enough penalties, well, the politicians come in and say, well, I'm going to legislate that. I'm going to do this. And so they're pulling at your heartstrings to see, can you vote for them? Will you support them? They tend to get behind different different topics, whether hot button topics, or whether they really sincerely care about those issues. We don't know, but they get behind those and they endorse certain issues in order to gain favor from a group. And the larger that group becomes, that people care about it, the more politicians flock to it. When people were people were when America was more pro-abortion, there was more politicians that were pro-abortion or anti, so, and I'm just using
Mm-hmm.
that as an example, but
Yeah. And
so,
that is a real good example. because that is one topic that divides people
Yeah.
a lot more than anything else.
And it's where, and we'll talk about this later on in the show, but that's the interesting thing about this moral conflict that we're speaking about is the factor that your religious belief system typically goes hand in hand with your moral compass.
Mm-hmm.
And you then find yourself saying, okay, well, what side is my unfortunately, religion, it tends to be taking a political side. And I'm telling you this as a pastor, it shouldn't.
Right.
Not necessarily in that way. You know what I'm saying? Where, uh, but I guess the main point that I'm getting at is you can find yourself very much conflicted based off of what you may have been taught from a pulpit or influenced, throughout the culture of your religion and your church. And you can find yourself saying, okay, on one hand, my gut and my emotion, I'm pro this, but my religion says I should be anti that. And here's this politician who's anti this. And he says I should vote, and everyone says I should vote that way because he's a part of my religious structure. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But first, the first question that we have is, how can you support a morally incorrupt person that supports a topic or that you support? They support whether it's abortion or whether it's
Gun rights,
gun rights or
death
what,
on death row. It can
capital
be,
punishment. Yeah.
yeah, anything,
And
any
but you
real dilemma topic. Mm-hmm.
and they support where you're coming from, absolutely represents your views, your values. However, in their personal life and how they represent themselves to be as a human does not match up or align with what you would say is something that you would support. So how do you support the topic, the political issue, but not support the politician? That's one of the biggest conflicts we have.
It is now because of our 24/7 news cycle and all the social media. We know every detail about every person, and nobody's perfect. There's going to be people elected that aren't, I mean, everybody that's elected isn't perfect. But at this point in our society, in this culture, with a lot of the movements that are going on, the Me Too movement, Time's Up movement, all of the things that have come out about the hostile work environments, sexual harassment, and there's a deeper conversation that needs to be had about the whole culture, the culture as a whole that fosters this sort of behavior, which we can get into that a little bit later, but because I have some ideas about that too, I do. But a person asked me a question uh, the other day that kind of spurred this discussion on for our show, with me anyway, and it was that question that Drew just stated. If you have certain moral convictions about things, but the candidate, that's the topic that they've chosen to say their platform is, but their whole life is a mess otherwise. I mean, really a mess. And they are immoral. They're in every aspect of their lives, and what they say is immoral and horrible. But you vote for them anyway, just because you like that issue that they've got. And how is it that some people justify doing that?
Yeah. I think for me, it boils down to it's about how much you want to support that particular topic that is like, is it worth it? And so sometimes we take the good with the bad, so to speak, and we say, okay, this person's going to give me the desired result, and everything is at a cost. So I'm not going to get everything I want out of this particular candidate. Yes, he's probably going to make sure that there is no funding for schools. However, he's not going to let us have legalized marijuana because I don't want that. Like those type of things are, when you're faced with that, it's like, wow, what side of the fence should I be on? And you ultimately end up having to choose in the booth one day. When you go in that voter booth, which one is it worth? And sometimes I think we pick the lesser of the two evils, opposed to using other methods. We just say, okay, this one isn't as bad, and we just hope that things don't turn out worse. And I think that's where America is in general, on state levels, on nationwide. You look at what just happened in Alabama. There were a lot of people who were like,
Right.
I don't like candidate. I'm not going to say their names necessarily,
Right.
but I don't like candidate A. But come on, candidate B is in the news making headlines. We definitely can't vote for a candidate, him. And ultimately, it's like you end up voting for a guy where it's like, well, it's better than it's better than what we could have ended up with. And I think that's where America is, even with the presidency. That a lot of people were looking at it like, you know, I think I voted for the lesser of two evils,
But did
and
I?
yeah, and now it's like, and when you make the wrong, here's another question related to that I think we always have to explore and help each other, is help support each other in, is how do we then reconcile like those feelings and emotions when we did ultimately, when we do come to terms with it, we may have made the wrong decision. Because it's always the if and maybe game. Like, you don't know. You really honestly don't know. But then sometimes when it gets really bad, you're like, yikes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
kind of do know.
Well, until somebody gets in a position or has a track record of seeing how they, especially in politics, if they have a track record of how they do things, how they speak. I mean, there's politicians that are, how they're reasonable. They think things through. They research things. They are very informed, and they look at both sides and try to do what they think is the right thing for their state or their city or their the government, federally. And a lot of times, regular folks like us don't have the background information and all of that. But even further than this, the person that asked me the question. So I'm going to go into our next little segment on, if you say you are a person of some faith, and it doesn't matter what faith it is, some religious or spiritual faith, and there's a candidate that is clearly immoral, but they do like that topic that you think is important, do you vote for them,
Yeah. I think
or
for,
you do not
yeah,
vote for them?
right. And that's a hard thing for a lot of people to go with. And I think it's very dangerous. And we can use America as a good example of how dangerous this becomes. Because we saw where the vote, the evangelical vote, became a thing of where it's for sale. It was a thing where in the 80s where it became, in the early 80s it just became, or 70s really, starting in the 70s, it just became a thing of, hey, look, we can get people together to vote for you. And it became, it corrupted some people within the religious side of it, and it corrupted the politicians to not look at this segment of people and value them. It actually caused a lot of politicians um, to look at some of the religious leaders as leeches or people who weren't true or sincere. And so a whole group of people get lumped into being all, like, so I think the bad rap, I guess overall what I'm trying to say is the bad rap that Christianity gets in America today is a lot of it's based off of the what has happened with politics and Christianity in America. A lot of people think that everyone who believes with the same thing that I believe across the board has to believe what the politicians have put out there,
Right.
and
The
that's
same thing, that
yeah,
we all believe the same thing, and then if we don't, then we're not Christian.
yeah, and that's the day,
Um,
yeah,
that's
that
a danger. And also, there's a danger. I'll just say, I think it's dangerous that, uh, I think that all people should be very involved in politics. I've clearly have been doing that for a long time in my own life. But, there's some suggestions coming out that that churches they can be not lose their tax exempt status if they get political.
Yeah.
And that's a dangerous place, because I think if churches let politicians start coming in to speak, which some of them do, then that's not about religion. That's not about spirituality.
Yeah.
That's a social issue. It's a political issue. It's a government issue. It's a legislative issue. And those two, that's been mixed. And I think that's a dangerous thing. I also think that if churches would do the things that the government's been relegated to do because church people haven't done them, like supporting the widows, the homeless, the sick, the ill, the
Yeah.
less fortunate, all of those things. Not give, give, give. That's a
Yeah.
whole nother show. But actually uplift them and do the things that now we rely on nonprofits and the government to do, it wouldn't be as big of an issue in our society.
Yeah.
We would be helping, we'd be living out our faith. So that brings this faith question back in, is how can a person of faith reconcile supporting an immoral person in a political office just because, say, my IRA is going to go up,
Right. Yeah.
or this or that or the other. How that's a moral dilemma that people face, but it seems like people have just shrugged it off and don't even look at themselves anymore and say, wow, I'm balancing my financial gain versus having somebody in an office that is morally corrupt, and I'm picking my financial gain, or I'm picking whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
the question that the person voiced to me, is not understanding what this process is that has happened in America, that has
so
happened.
I feel like one of the things that we have to note in this is the factor that there are some goods to the church taking on social issues of the time, such as the civil rights movement was one that was spearheaded in
Yeah.
the church and was necessary for the gain of humanity. And
Well, I'm not
so,
saying,
well,
Drew, I'm not
no,
saying
no,
I
I'm
don't
not saying
think
that.
churches should not do.
No,
I
no.
think
Well,
churches should do social
I'm making a
issues.
bigger point. Like
Okay,
it's
okay.
the point that if it goes back to the same point you were making, as long as we continue to look in ourselves within and say, okay, is this for the gain of society or is this for my own personal gain? And the truth of the matter is, no matter where your moral compass and no matter what your religion is, your moral compass typically should support the advancement of society over you. And
Mm-hmm.
so if so when it comes to what topics should I support, how do I support, if this person's going to help us, you may not agree with this, that, or another about his life. But if this person's going to help us get to a place as a society where it's going to help us, and it isn't just my own prejudice against something. Like, for example, there are some hot button social issues that all of us really can be on one accord with because no one should be abused. No one should be subjected to a lack of health care or food in their communities and all these different things that we see in today's society that shouldn't exist. We can, if a person who's made some mistakes in their life and maybe still making some, but is fighting hard for that, I think that's where I find myself saying, maybe I'm willing to roll with this person and grow with them and see if they can stop making those mistakes and if they can help us get to this main point. But it is about doing a self check and saying, okay, but am I going to and I'm just putting it out there and it may make me sound judgmental, but I feel like it is wrong for us to say, I'm going to vote for this person because because of capitalism or because he supports me getting more. I believe that your vote has to be one reason why we have an input, the reason why we live in the republic that we do, and we have this say is the factor that, hey, we get a chance to have an input on what is good for us as a whole. Our vote should represent what our society needs and not what it wants. And I think money and greed has corrupted things, or people's desire for money has corrupted things to a point where that's what society's saying they want more of. The rich wants to get richer, and the poor is sometimes tricked into supporting the rich in hopes of a trickle down.
Yeah, well, that's another show.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah.
So
So,
I don't know the answer to the what has caused, other than selfishness, I guess is what we're saying.
yeah.
Thinking
I
about
think,
me
yeah.
first in everything instead of society's whole. I've had people tell me, "Oh, I am pleased with everything that's happening because this is I'm doing better."
Well,
I've had people tell me that, and that's great. I mean, our IRA is doing better too, but that's that's not um, the reason necessarily
well,
to
and
support certain things.
here's my challenge to the individual who voted and said, okay, it's nothing wrong with me making sure my retirement's great. It's nothing wrong with me doing this, that,
Yeah.
and other. And that's fine. But if you're doing great, always remember, in most cases, it is on the back of someone else. So how do you then reconcile that? And I know to some degree that's another show, but that's another way to deal with some of the feelings that you may feel where you say, okay, I chose the necessary evil in order to get this, but how do you so quote unquote clean your hands?
Yeah.
Sometimes the repentive action is in how you care, not just based on it. Like, in other words, I help this homeless guy, so it's okay for me to support someone who's morally incorrupt, or whatever. No, I'm not saying that, but sometimes you do have to take certain actions out of the politicians and out of the corporate structure, and you yourself go forward and you help an individual fish, learn how to fish, opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to support or not support a system for other people. Sometimes you, as an individual, can make a difference in another person's life, one on one,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of changes even the focus of, do I vote for this person or not? Because if you go all hand in hand with a person who lives in a food desert, if you live with a person who doesn't have access to health care, if you're around a person and a person is in your life who who's gone through rape and needed an abortion or something of that nature, it changes your view on some of these hot button issues that you've disconnected
Mm-hmm.
yourself from, that your religious structure may have told you you can't support. Um, that's I'm not going to preach, but that's the beautiful thing about it, from my belief system. That's the beautiful thing about Jesus. He came and lived with us, and it kind of negates the religious side of things when you actually live with people and love them and view it through their eyes. So before voting just one side, take a look at the other side and then know that you don't want to support it. But don't just say no or yes according to thoughts or ideas that someone else pumped into you or some system
Mm-hmm.
pumped into you. Find out for yourself, like, okay, be spirit led or be, whatever it is, and see for yourself what's the right or wrong way to,
Use
yeah,
your thinker.
that's what God gave it to you for, is
That's
so
right.
that you can be able to get this for yourself. Because those moral conflicts that we're talking about for this show in general, it's all based off of the fact that we're going to have these conflicts in life, and you can't avoid them. But unfortunately, you can't avoid thinking, and so you want to, but be a thinker, be a person who processes things, who tries things, and and don't be scared to be wrong. And when you're wrong, don't be scared of reconciliation.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with reconciling yourself and and having repentive actions for when you have had the wrong line of thinking. Because honestly, there's some lines of thinking that I think that I know my experiences in life have caused me to not be necessarily fair. As an African American, there's some biases that I have toward African Americans, whether it's right or wrong. There's some things that I won't, like we joked about it earlier, but I was like, I probably would vote for Oprah.
Yeah.
Why? Because of her color. Like, and should I be proud of this? I'm not bragging or anything like that, but there's a hope. I would vote for her because I want my daughter to see that she could be it. You know what I'm saying? And that gives her a hope.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm willing to sell out something for that. And
Well,
that's just me being transparent. A lot of people might not like hearing that, but
I
it's
think
like,
that what you've hit on one thing there about your daughter and your children. The only way that we can change the culture, and I think we'll talk about this probably on another show, the only way we can actually change the culture is by teaching our children to be more inclusive, to question themselves about what's right and wrong, and to teach them those things, and grandchildren as well. Have conversations about these issues. And
yeah,
so not just to tell them how to think, but let them have a conversation with them about things that matter. That's why we do this show, because we talk about things that matter in life. And I think it's important for the grown-ups in the family to lead a conversation with children, grandchildren, and each other
yeah,
about pertinent topics, and not try to change each other's mind, but to find out, Steve, I've said this a million times on the show in the Stephen Covey book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The first habit is seek first to understand.
yes,
And where that's where we come from on these real important issues, is trying to seek first to understand the other person, not try to change their mind. And by doing that, we come to a greater understanding of everybody and other people's, and other people that aren't like you. And being around other people, bringing other people into your home that aren't like you. And travel, all sorts of things can enlarge our world and enlarge our scope of knowledge and our worldview about all these issues. So those are some of the ways that I am trying to do that, especially with this now topic of the Me Too and Time's Up and all that. I see my granddaughter looking at the news. I saw her looking at the Golden Globes, hearing all the women and men talk about Time's Up and all that. And I saw her looking, and she's 12 years old, this one. And, this is a time to have those kind of discussions with boys too.
yeah. You make the most interesting point that as a parent I definitely support. Who do you want teaching your kids? Do you want,
Yeah.
because they're going to hear from them, and if your point of view may be a little bit different, let them hear from those. They're going to hear from those celebrities, but then
And
let
then
them hear
talk
from you.
about it. Yeah,
Yeah,
and then talk about it.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's so, and one of the most interesting things that come from a Thanksgiving argument, about politics between an uncle and and your dad, is you get a chance to hear both points of view. A little bit of language in between, but you get a
Yeah.
chance to hear both points of view,
Yeah.
and you grow from it. So our time is about up.
Okay.
We're at about that 29-minute mark. So we're going to continue our discussion on the moral conflicts of life. We got a lot of different ways that we can cover this, but we want to know which way would you like for us to cover. You can always send us a message on our Facebook, or if you're watching this on YouTube, or if you can leave a comment. And if you're watching it through the iTunes podcast, you can message us that through that also. So let us know what you want to hear, and we can cover the subject. But we'll be back next week. And Gigi, you got anything you want to sign off with?
Not anything except thanks for listening. Thanks for being our listener. It's good to see you, Drew, after our 3 or 4 weeks of being off, and I'll see you next week on This Life Matters.
All right.